Nice.
Nice. So
Nice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
Elena.
And Elena, this is beautiful. I was thinking of how we structure this, and this has been kind of a new structure for us to do this here in this space that we're doing. Many of you are with us every Sunday at the CTL, Center for Transforming Lives, know that this is different from what we're doing. It's a kind of a different format, and it's been fun. I've been drinking from my cup. I noticed you brought your stainless steel thermos this time.
Right.
And I brought my Mark Twain cup. One of the things that I read recently that Mark Twain had said, which seemed to be appropriate in this kind of this pandemic surreal time, he wrote, the secret source of humor itself is not joy, but sorrow. There is no humor in heaven. And I found that to be a strange thing to say. Huh. But the reality is, where do we most experience the depth of joy? Mm-hmm. Sometimes from the depth of pain, sometimes from the depth of the challenging moments we find ourselves. Simply said, sometimes from the depth of our very being, which I take to be the ground of our being, where we find God as the source of our lives. And so I want to suggest that we find this idea of humor kind of comes naturally and sometimes is the most profound in some of these most challenging moments. So we're going to try to do this from Sunday to Sunday. We're going to try to throw up a little bit of humor for you, and I hope that you will send stuff to us as well, things that you come across that you find really inspiring and just plain out, flat out humorous. So this confinement in our homes has given us a lot of creative space, right? A lot of us are finding some creative things to do. We're talking about pictures we find and stories about objects that we find, and we create interesting things. And sometimes the creativity is just amazing what folks will find in the moment when they're trapped together for days and days on end, like this one that someone sent to me the other day. Is it coming up? It's not coming up?
Oh.
Looks like none of the video clips attached to the PowerPoint file.
Oh, no.
Oh, well. Technological problems are part of the journey.
Well, that's unfortunate. Okay, we should try. Next time, we will.
Oh,
that's right. We should try to.
No.
You want to try to do that one, Charme? That would be awesome. All right.
So.
Well, you'll have to Google it for your own enjoyment and pleasure. Just look couple doing horse with no name, and you'll find some fun with that. I'm sorry that it didn't show up here. The other thing that I thought was fun that we won't be able to show, I'll have to tell it. Is a British sports announcer who obviously can't report on soccer games or tournaments, and so he's at home with his wife and their two Labradors, a black Labrador and a golden Labrador, and so he starts off with his British accent announcing these two competitors, these two dogs, and he says, now so-and-so, the golden lab, she's calm, she's been the champ for the reigning champ for 2 years. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. Been the reigning champ for 2 years, and then the other one, Sparky, I think, the black one, he's come new into this field, but he's aggressive, and we're expecting a real challenge here, and you still don't know what's going on with it, and he keeps talking until finally someone in the background, I think it's wife, says, get on with it. And so he says, right, and they're off, and so the two dogs walk over to their food bowls and they start eating their food. And as they're eating, he says, well, for some reason, Maeve, who might be the golden, I'll make the name, but Maeve has taken a slower approach this time. Is it her age? Is something going on? Is it what's happening here? But Sparky is diving in. Clearly, Sparky is wanting this. Look at Maeve's tail wagging as if she's having a conciliatory moment with her competitor. He just goes on and on. It's really fun to watch. But it reminds me of this time we find ourselves in, which is, what do we do with our space? What do we do with our time? What do we do with all of this, with this anxiety that we find? And so I think we have these opportunities to kind of be creative. So send us your thoughts. We'll get the technology working next time, and then we'll have something new for you as well.
One of our 1111 friends sent me a really funny thing that I can tell quickly, and your dog story reminded me of it. So there's a black dog, kind of a pug, somehow dressed in a little costume that looks like a bee. So it's yellow and black stripes. And on the sidebar, you see, when the dog bites, when the bee stings. I simply remember my favorite things. People are so creative in this time.
Well,
one of our favorite songs, as you guys know, at 1111, is singing a song, and we've sung it on a lot of occasions, including a funeral of one of our own. It has meant a lot to us. It speaks, of course, about the uncertainties in the journey, but also about the things we know, and that is that we are together, and we might as well go singing a song. Brad and Elena, go for it.
Y'all sing along there where you are as well.
Yeah.
Sing along with us. Here we go. Here we go. We know this river always keeps flowing. We will be rowing our whole lives long. And we may never know where we're going, but we can go there singing a song, yeah. Just like a mother to a child she's holding, just like a soldier marching along. Just like the faithful on Sunday morning, raising our voices, singing a song, yeah. Eyes will shine, but not as bright. Arms will hold, but not as tight. When a word is only spoken. So give it feeling, give it right. Play it in for quarter time. Sing it with the heart wide open. Sing of the beauty right there beside you. Bring it inside you, making you strong. So that when trouble comes round to greet you, still it will leave you singing a song. Eyes will shine, but not as bright. Arms will hold, but not as tight. When a word is only spoken. So give it feeling, give it right. Play it in for quarter time. Sing it with a heart wide open. And may the music of life overtake us, till angels mistake us for a heavenly throng. And may that joyful sound be our shelter, find us together singing a song. We'll be together singing a song.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brad and Elena. That's, may the angels mistake us for a heavenly throng.
Cool.
That's nice. We're doing some different things here this last week. We heard from a number of people who said they wanted a little more participation. Of course, we tried to do the bouncing ball on the song, and that didn't work. That's really an advanced tech that we don't have the expertise for right now. But we're trying. Who knows what we'll create if we stay at this for a long time. But we did think that maybe saying some things together, like singing and maybe having a prayer together. So we've got this next prayer that I want you to join in with us there where you are. One of my favorite poets and illustrators, a guy named Michael Lunig, who has got an organization called Story People, and one of the has several books of prayers that I find really inspiring. Very simple, but they get right to the point. So I'm going to ask if Blair can put up the slide for the prayer, and then we will join in together, and you join us there. Let us pray. Holy One, help us to rise up from our struggle. Like a tree rises up from the soil, our roots reaching down to our trouble, our rich, dark dirt of existence, finding nourishment deeply and holding us firmly, always connected, growing upward and into the sun's light. Amen. Thanks.
I can see why you like that. We're going to move now to our Kairos time. And Brad, if you don't mind us to have some nice music playing. Friends, this is a time when we generally just stop and take our breaths together. We feel the connectivity of the gift of life. We also benefit from slowing down a little bit. But imagine we're pretty slow this morning. So I still invite you to take a time of relaxation. I'm going to read a poem this time during Kairos. It's kind of a dark poem, or at least it acknowledges darkness, but it's infused with some wonderful wisdom. It's an excerpt from a poem called "For Calling the Spirit Back from Wandering the Earth in Its Human Feet" by Joy Harjo. Don't worry, the heart knows the way, though there may be high rises, interstates, checkpoints, armed guards, massacres, wars, and those who will despise you because they despise themselves. The journey might take you a few hours, a day, a year, a few years, 100, 1,000, or even more. Watch your mind. Without training, it might run away and leave your heart for the immense human feast set by the thieves of time. Do not hold regrets. When you find your way to the circle, to the fire kept burning by keepers of your soul, you will be welcomed. You must clean yourself with cedar, sage, and other healing plants. Cut the ties you have to failure and shame. Let go the pain you are holding in your mind, your shoulders, your heart, all the way to your feet. Let go the pain of your ancestors to make way for those who are heading in our direction. Ask for forgiveness. Call upon the help of those who love you. These helpers will take many forms: animal, element, bird, angel, saint, stone, or ancestor, or friend. Call your spirit back. It may be caught in corners and creases of shame, judgment, and human abuse. You must call in a way that your spirit will want to return. Speak to it as you would to a beloved child.
So I'm going to read this morning the text that I want to talk with you just a little bit about, share just a few thoughts. It's a beautiful poem, and I think if you were listening, you'll find some of the ideas that resonate in that poem with what we're talking about today in terms of where is our story going right now? What is your story? How is it going with your story right now? And where is it going? Where might it go? And so we're thinking about being rooted and grounded today. And I want to read from the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verses 6 through 7. I'm reading from the Message if you decide to follow along. Thomas asked, "Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way?" And Jesus answered, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to God except by way of me." And then I had a quote here that I wanted to read that I just want you to hold on to. It's by Octavia Butler, who was a 20th century science fiction writer, and an interesting person who often thought in terms of spiritual themes. And she writes this. She says, "All that you touch, all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change." I was cycling this last week. I was out on the Trinity Trail, and I stopped at the Clear Fork trailhead, and I was getting off the bike. There was another guy there, a younger guy, and so we just exchanged some pleasantries and conversation really quickly. And he was the one that sort of broke the ice. I mean, he smiled, he says, "How you doing?" And I said, "Fine." He says, "Nice weather." And I said, "Yeah, it's really nice weather." And he says, "Well, I'm not going to argue with good weather." And I kept thinking, we're sort of dodging the reality here, right? We're not even talking about the obvious, like, how are you managing all of this? And I was trying to think of just the right way to say, "Are you scared?" And instead, he looks at me and he says, "So how's it going?" And I said, "Excuse me?" And he says, "So how are you doing? What's your story?" And I thought, well, I said, that's kind of what I was thinking about asking you. And I said, it's kind of difficult right now. It's just my wife and I at home, and I explained some of the context of where we are and what we're doing. And then I said it back to him. I said, "How are you doing? What's your story?" And he said, "My story's up and down every day." And he was a younger guy, and he says, "I have my kids at home, my wife. I'm at home with her when I'm normally at the office. It's kind of crazy. We're our third week into this. We're trying to navigate. We're trying to figure out how to adjust this whole thing, finding our space and stepping on each other's space. And it's challenging," he said. "But what's even more challenging," he says, "I'm a financial planner. And he says, I'm kind of new at this. This is not at all where I saw my story going. I mean, this is not what I'd planned for. And to be honest, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what to do next." And I kind of smiled, and I said, I get that. I said, "That must be really hard." And he says, "It is." And he said, "But I'm trying, and I'm just staying focused, and like, what are you going to do?" And I thought, well, that's an interesting question. What are we going to do? And I wanted to press that with him a little bit, even a little further, but I simply said, "Do you have any idea what you might be doing next?" And he says, "All I know is that I just hope we can take care of this thing pretty quickly, and we can get things back to normal." Now, I thought to myself, what does that even mean now, right? I mean, I've listened, and you've heard from your friends, and we've heard from members of the 1111 community, and from our friends, and everyone's doing all right for the most part, but a lot of us aren't too. If it's not simply just the anxiety of not knowing and adjusting to another week of just how long is this going to go on, there's some of us really struggling. Some of us living alone, some of us dealing with what obviously will be job losses, certainly massive job changes, and we have this sense of sort of existential unknowing. And how do we live with that? And I sort of wanted to press that with him, but that's kind of heavy. And so I just smiled and I said, "Hey, listen, good luck with everything. And it was good to visit with you." And he had his way to go back home, he said, and I was getting ready to finish up the second half of my ride. I thought about those words, "All you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. God is change, and the only lasting truth is change." This text that we have from the Gospel of John is part of this I Am series that we're in, where Jesus has all of these different sayings. He says, "I am the light, I'm the good shepherd, I am the gate." And here he has, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And to me, it says more than I think we do, because I think we think about this text. I think sometimes we think of this text as sort of like an easy answer, sort of a happy conclusion to things. I have this tendency to think that most of us lean on God for the wrong reasons. We sort of lean on God the way my quickly experienced new friend on the bike trail suggested. We just hope things will get better, get fixed, and things will get back to normal. And yet, any of us who have experienced real tragedy, real challenges in our life, real obstacles, knows that things don't get back to normal. Things get well. We do find ways that all things shall be well. And yet, at the same time, when we're living in the midst of this, we sort of lean on God for that. And I think we miss what Jesus is saying here. And we miss a really helpful, important idea, which I think is how we practice being grounded. Jesus says, "I am the way," and the disciples all the way up to this point, if you go back to the beginning, and they were all called out of what they were doing, out of their usual vocational fields of work, if they were boat makers, or if they were fishermen, or if they were agriculturally involved, or carpenters. Jesus called them all out of their different capacities, and they followed him. a lot of them followed him because as they understood the story, as they understood the narrative and its trajectory, Jesus was the one who was going to fix things. He was going to reestablish God's kingdom, get rid of the Roman Empire, free up the Jewish people once and for all. And yet, here he is now at this point, and they're saying, where are you going? What are you talking about? You're going somewhere. And he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. This is the way I'm going. And they're left with this confusion. This isn't the story. What do we do when reality slaps us in the face? It literally shuts down our story and our narrative, and that's where we are today. But I think we're finding some signs of hope. I think we're finding some signs of what it means to be grounded in this reality. Paul Tillich called this remembering how we put life back together from moment to moment because we are grounded in this reality. We are rooted in this reality of grace and love. Linda and I were walking along yesterday. We took a long walk for the first time, and we were walking up the street, and in our neighborhood, everybody's putting bears out on the windows. I don't know if they're doing that in some of your other neighborhoods, but in our neighborhood, we're all putting bears out there. The first couple of days, Linda and I had bears, and we noticed that when the kids and parents would walk by, nobody would look at our house. So I got out the door, and I walked out to the sidewalk, and I sat there, and I looked at the double-paned windows, and I said, you can't see our bears. And so we put our one big bear, it's a patchwork kind of quilted bear.
This is for the kids going on the bear hunt.
Yes, on the bear hunt, yes.
Right.
Yeah, everybody was saying put the bears in the windows. And so we put ours on a chair, a little tiny chair, and sat it on the front step and next to the column and then put a cap on it. That's all we had, just that one bear. And Linda and I were walking down the street and enjoying some of the other bears and sights that we saw. And then we saw across the street, our newer neighbors have this beautiful house. They had baskets full of bears, just baskets full on either side of the door. They had bears in the bushes. They had bears in every window of the house. And I thought, well, that's a little bit of overkill. But then they had this big sign, and if you got closer and closer to the sign, it said, please do not feed the bears. And then it said, if you'll look around the corner, you'll find something else. And so it created sort of an adventure, which was really fun. And I looked at Lynn and I said, here we have bear envy, right? I mean, we've got neighborhood bear envy, or at least I did. And she said, it's all right. Everybody's doing what they can do. And we walked on up the street, and we saw where people had written, stuff with chalk on the sidewalk, and there's messages of hope. And then we saw the one that said, don't worry, be happy, which is a wonderful song, and it just kind of rings in your head. It's like one of those earworms. It's a great message of uplifting feel, but yet it says something that misses the point, right? Because happiness is sort of that superficial kind of feeling of, okay, everything's fine, everything's good, I got everything I want, I got things the way I want them to be. I'm happy. But in a time like this, happiness almost smacks you in the face. It's almost an insult. And yet I knew what their intention was. But I couldn't help but think of Ross Gay, who I've talked about before in 1111, wrote this wonderful book called Book of Delights and the Catalog of Gratitude. And one of the things that he says in there early on is he says, there is never a better time to think about delight than when we find ourselves in the midst of sorrow. And others, he said, would come up to him and say, how can you possibly think about delight at a time like this? And of course, he wrote the book 2 years ago, but now it's even more apropos for today. How could we possibly talk about delight in a time like this? And Ross Gay would say, how can you not talk about delight in a time like this? When Jesus was telling his disciples that he was the way, the truth, and the life, I think what he was saying was he was suggesting the path, the way that we begin to find our groundedness in this time of chaos is by being in these moments where we find ourselves, by being creative and engaging with life itself. How are you engaging your life at home with one another? If you're by yourself, and you find yourself, as Charme was telling this story, and you find yourself sort of overwhelmed by shame or by fear or by anxiety, these dark sort of things that we can easily find ourselves trapped in them, how do we then engage with delight? And the only way that Jesus suggests is to follow this path of connection. Wherever we are, we connect. We let go of our need to be something. We let go of our need that everything is the way we think it should be, because in the moment we are strengthened by the grace that is present in all of these moments. We are strengthened by the possibilities of love, which is the essence of life in all of these moments. How can we participate in these things that bring life to that moment? So we walked on past that, and as we walked all the way over to a golf course, and we walked down past there, and we got lost, and we were just walking these paths, and we ended up with a 7-mile walk, and just kind of kept on wandering, and we walked accidentally into people's yards, which were beautiful mansions back over on the other side, and people would wave to us, like, it's okay. I mean, they just waved to us, and I thought on any other occasion they might have called security or something, but they just kind of smiled. They said, beautiful dog, because we had our dog with us, and we just continued this path of noticing and watching, and as we were walking back past the country club there towards our neighborhood, which is a mile away, somebody ran up behind us and said, hey, Reverend, and then just kept running.
Oh.
And Linda said, I'm pretty sure he was talking about me. And I said, how would you know? Of course, we have no idea. So if that was you, please send us a text, because we really didn't see who that was. But it was just one of these things that you start finding joy in moments when you allow yourself to open up. And we have to let go. We truly have to let go. It has to be an act of courage, which doesn't mean fearlessness, right? It means willingness to risk opening. We have to be willing to let go of where this is all going, because we don't make our story in the future. We make our story in these moments. We make our path by walking it moment to moment. So we made our way back home, and as we were walking back home, Linda and I didn't put the bear out that day before we went walking. And there were the bears across the street. And here was this woman coming with her little 3-year-old boy behind her, and she was pushing a stroller. And she smiled and she said, good to see you this morning. And the 3-year-old said, where's the patchwork quilt bear? Oh. And Linda looked at me, and I looked, and we just kind of smiled, and we said, wait here, we'll go get it. And we got back out, and we put it down, and it just reminded me, it's not about the grandioseness, the grandeur, the beauty, the has-to-be certain way that measures the moment.
Right.
It's really not about that. You can talk about all the things you want in life in order to be happy. But delight comes from where we consciously, intentionally engage in creating a moment that brings life. Not just to us, even better if it's bringing life to someone else. That's how we walk this road. One of my favorite quotes was from the Two Towers. Some of our friends had been using Lord of the Rings quotes recently. And one of the things he said was, this is one that Sam Wise, if you read The Lord of the Rings and you read The Two Towers, you would remember this scene. In this scene, Sam Wise and Frodo had been walking along for some time, and they find themselves at this abandoned sort of castle, and they end up in a fight with each other because Mr. Frodo is just overwhelmed by the carrying of this powerful ring and the power that it gives him. And so he ends up defending himself against people he doesn't need to do so, right? That's what happens when we get afraid. We end up fighting things we don't need to fight because we're scared. Mm-hmm. And so he fights the very source of support that's there with him. And Sam Wise looks at him, and after they finally calm down, Sam Wise says, it's all wrong by rights. We shouldn't be here, but we are. And it's like in all the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered, we find ourselves here. But what makes the story matter isn't that it's the exact ending that you think has to happen. It's what you do with the moments that we have. When Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life, we're reminded, well, it reminds me of this Peanuts cartoon. Can we throw that up? Blair, can we throw that up? There's Charlie Brown saying, someday we will all die, Snoopy. And then Snoopy smiles back and says, well, I'm assuming he's smiling, but he says, true, but on all other days, we will not. That's where we have to be. Right now, that's where we have to be in these moments on this road that we're traveling and we don't know where it's going. The truth and life and the way reminds us that we make that path together. We participated in now, here and now, the kingdom of God by finding all the ways we can connect life to these moments. I know it gets overwhelming. I've heard the stories. I know a lot of us are struggling. But this is when the stories really matter. This is when we have the opportunity to lean on God, not as the fixer, but as the empowerment that allows us to co-create. Amen.